Hello everyone, it's Jeff Rich here from The Burning Archive. Thanks for joining me. Today I'm doing an episode on recent events, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the series of bilateral meetings, especially between Presidents Xi, Putin and Prime Minister Modi in Tianjin, which do seem to mark a significant change in the balance of power around the world. There's been a range of different interpretations of this. I'm going to dig in a little bit to the detail of what was actually decided and the types of actions that were taken rather than just the atmospherics and the optics of hugs and laughs and meetings in cars, or the hysteria of various Western commentators such as Peter Navarro. And I'll also provide you a bit of detail about the actual Tianjin Declarations, as well as my overall assessment of, how significant this meeting was in terms of the changing geopolitics, the new meta of world politics, world history right now. Okay, let's get into it first of all. And I do think my first big point is that this is a demonstration of a new balance of power, a new distribution of influence and resources and initiative around the world, are new dynamics, what I've called a new meta of the world game of geopolitics. However, I don't think it's necessarily a historic meeting or the definition of a new world order, even though it is a significant event and there are some important developments. I think it's somewhere in between the sort of nothing, the sort of event that is apparent in some of the continued incomprehension of Western commentators, and more than incomprehension, the active denigration of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization by many, defense and security establishment affiliated media identities in the West. But nor is it, the start of a brave new world led by BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I do think it's important to sort of avoid binary thinking. This has been a bad habit of Western analysis of the world for, a long time. And I think there is also a little bit of cheerleading for the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And in fact, I think what one should do is take the lead of the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin himself, who spoke some very wise words at the St. Petersburg International Forum, saying that he is, in fact, not making a whole new order for the world. The second point I really wanted to make was the actual Tianjin Declaration itself. Now, these leaders' summits do express some high principles, generally within a framework of rhetoric and language, which, if you've been following the diplomacy of these nations over the last any period of time, many of the statements in the Tianjin Declaration are relatively familiar. It can sometimes be hard to sift the wheat from the chaff of the high-minded principle and the apparently minor little details that are there in the statement. So I wanted to take you quickly through the 5 key principles or key sections of the Tianjin Declaration to point out the main things that were actually agreed to by the nations of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So the first point is that there's a set of commitments to principles of international cooperation, and primarily here the two key points I would point out is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is seen as a vehicle for getting the United Nations to operate as it was meant to be back in the United Nations, as a genuine, fair, balanced multipolar world order, and that there should in fact be specific reform of the United Nations governing institutions. Of course, this particularly means the Security Council, but it also means how the United Nations operates as an organisation and as, you know, a set of rules and processes for cooperation, multilateral cooperation. That, I think, is quite significant in this Tianjin Declaration. Of course, it's been asserted in a range of forums, including BRICS, a few months ago. But again, I think it's highlighted now, especially in the context of the persistent unilateralist approach of the United States of America and other Western powers. And it's also in this section that the Shanghai Cooperation leaders have declared an intent to develop a Shanghai Cooperation Organization development plan through to 2035. This is really the governing plan, I guess, for how the Shanghai Cooperation will organise itself. There's a 10-year plan. There's a clear commitment, I guess, to upgrade the level of action from Shanghai Cooperation and its impact. And particularly the three next sections of the Tianjin Declaration really detail those areas of cooperation that will be part of this 10-year plan for developing the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to 2035. So the next section is on security challenges and threats. Now, there's two key points I really want to highlight here in this section. The first is there is a clear condemnation of terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, and also of the unacceptability of double standards. Now, this could be interpreted, this reference to double standards, as an internal debate within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, particularly the dispute between India and Pakistan around cross-border terrorism, which also involves a dispute around China and whether states that profess to oppose terrorism have been supporting terrorism behind certain screens. And I'll say a little bit more about the India-Pakistan dimension of that in a second. But unacceptability of double standards could also refer to, Western sponsorship of terrorism, Western designation of states like Iran, for example, a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as a, leading state sponsor of terrorism, while also conducting terror attacks itself, including, of course, its bombing of nuclear facilities and other sort of activities. The second key point on security challenges and threats is the establishment of a universal centre for countering challenges and threats to security. So there's actually, and together with that, an SCO anti-drug centre. So there's actually an organisational response to operationalise this sort of joint action between security challenges and threats. Again, something that, for example, the United Nations has perhaps never really succeeded in doing. The third area is on economic cooperation, and here I want to just highlight two key things. Now, I'm no particular, expert on the economic issues, but there is here a reference to increasing the share of national currencies in mutual settlements and a decision to establish the SCO Development Bank. So SCO will be backed, like BRICS, I guess, is also backed by real money and real investments to enhance, the economic security of these nations. And there's no talk of de-dollarization or of alternative currencies, but there is talk of increasing the share of national currencies in mutual settlements. And I would note that a week or two before this meeting, India, the Indian External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, flagged in his meeting in Moscow with Sergei Lavrov that India would change its attitude towards participating in a free trade zone in Eurasia, which would lead to significant increases in the share of national currencies in mutual settlements between the Shanghai Cooperation Organization nations. The other key point on technology cooperation is that there's a range of practical projects, probably funded by the SCO Development Bank, that are in the areas of transport, energy, technology, and digital cooperation. So again, there are real practical, tangible moves here rather than just high-minded statements. The fourth section of the declaration, the third key area of action under the the 2035 plan, is on humanitarian cooperation. This is a broad agenda. You could say it as the broad cultural agenda. Again, it's a similar cultural agenda to the BRICS cooperation in sport, in health, in education, in women's rights, and in other science, culture, preservation of heritage. Of course, sports, this is in the context of, bans on Russia and the International Olympic Committee. Health also includes issues such as, access to vaccines without, exorbitant payments of IP rights to Western corporations, and other sorts of issues. And here also there is a decision to establish a global dialogue between civilizations with cooperation in education, science, culture, and the preservation of heritage. The global dialogue between civilizations is the first significant step, I think, to actually, again, operationalize a commitment that China made some time ago to a global civilizations initiative. And clearly Shanghai Cooperation is one of the key areas of that cooperation. Of course, India, China, the states of Central Asia, Eurasia as a whole is very much the repository of many, many complex civilizations, not just, one or two big civilization states. And it's great to see that global dialogue going on. The fifth section and final section of the Tianjin Declaration relates to SCO development and expansion. This is quite brief. Again, there is a statement in the area, I think, of principles of international cooperation that Shanghai Cooperation Organization is focused on the Central Asian core of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There isn't a broad expansion of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Laos has been included as a dialogue partner, but it is in consolidate and deliver and operationalize mode rather than expansion mode. Its value will be tested not by how many people turn up at the meetings, I think, or the photo ops of those meetings, but what the Shanghai Cooperation Organization actually does on these 5 points that it's outlined, how much it will actually deliver in its 10-year plan. Now, that's the substance of what has been agreed to, a lot of which is, pretty inconsistently and poorly reported in the media, including, indeed, on many of the sort of alternative media channels that often focus on the, who won and diplomatic point scoring and, whether India's, embraced China or whether China's embraced India or whether whatever. But I do think there are a number of important points I'd like to draw out in my interpretation of these events. First of all, in the statement as of the joint leaders, the heads of state of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, there was a clear condemnation not just of terrorism, not just of cross-border terrorism, but specifically of the Pahalgam terror attack in Kashmir in, I think it was April, from memory, April 2025, that obviously killed a number of people and led to Operation Sindoor. This has been an issue of dispute before within the SCO. At the Defence Ministers meeting a couple of months ago, India refused to sign the joint declaration because there was no condemnation of that. Subsequently, at the BRICS meeting, there was a clear condemnation of the Pahalgam terror attack, which was seen as a diplomatic concession by China. And it's worth noting that a lot of the Indian media have focused on various optics and snubs of Pakistan, but I think this statement is a much more significant thing. It was flagged by Dr. S. Jaishankar a couple of weeks ago in his meeting with Wang Yi as a key desired outcome from the meeting from India's point of view. And China has delivered, whereas previously it had, I guess, protected Pakistan to some degree from, or shielded Pakistan from, direct criticism. It's worth noting that both India and Pakistan entered the SCO only relatively recently. I think it's 2017. They joined at the same time, and it was generally seen that I guess China brought Pakistan in and Russia brought India in. As we saw at this summit, there was a lot of warmth between Russia, India and China, not so much warmth displayed towards Pakistan. This issue of cross-border terrorism is a much more important than the Himalayan border dispute issue between China and India, even though that is significant. This issue affects more than just the Himalayan border. It obviously affects generally the relations between Pakistan and India, and also affects it has impacts on India in Myanmar and Bangladesh and other areas as well. So it's a very significant issue. It's worth noting also that this was what was focused on in Narendra Modi, or one of the key points in Narendra Modi's own address to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, in which he said, "Recently we witnessed the most heinous face of terrorism in Pahalgam. I express my deep gratitude to all the friendly nations that stood by us during this moment of grief. This attack was not only an assault on the conscience of India, but also an open challenge to every nation and every individual who believes in humanity. In such circumstances, it is natural to ask, can the open support for terrorism by certain countries ever be acceptable to us? We must state it clearly and in one voice. Double standards on terrorism are unacceptable. Together we must oppose terrorism in every form and manifestation. This is our responsibility towards humanity." And I think certainly the Indian media have reported, and I think they're correct, this is a major diplomatic, success for India, for humanity, and also a sign of China moving towards India, as much as India moving towards China. The second general analytical point I'd like to make about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting is the importance of converting the high principles into practical action. The 10-year plan for the SCO development strategy through to 2035 really does define, I think, as President Putin said, the main directions of the organization's work in politics, the economy, security and humanitarian issues. And there are real significant outcomes here to focus on. The Security Centre, the Development Bank, the various projects in both the culture field and the economic and the security field. The Anti-Drug Centre, a very important issue in Central Asia, Afghanistan, which experienced a dreadful earthquake at about the same time as the SCO summit, has been benighted by drugs for many years. And indeed, there was a anti-drug centre established in Dushanbe as part of this set of decisions. So this summit is delivering more than just the high-minded rhetoric. Some people have criticised China in recent times for being big on the high-minded rhetoric, but perhaps not backing it up with substantive action. And I do feel, to some degree, that is a valid criticism. And but there is signs here that perhaps there is a bit of a change in direction from China, of being a little bit more of an active collaborator in substantive action, not just focused on China's interests in its multilateral actions. SCO, has to some degree been seen as one of China's key security initiatives, and I guess there is an element of accepting it being run by a troika. Perhaps now it needs to reflect the interests of the three Asian giants: Russia, North Asia; India, South Asia; and of course China in East Asia. Okay, the third key point I'd like to make in my sort of observations on the summit and related bilateral meetings is a point very well made by Kevork Almassian from Syriana Analysis in a video he did today or overnight, and highly recommend everyone watch that. I will include a link below, and of course do check out my discussion with Tariq Chil Omar and Kevork Almassian from last Friday, which I'll also include a link to in this video. Kevork said it's not about building blocks, it's about networks. It's about mesh rather than building blocks. And it's also about developing institutions and processes and habits of working between neighbours and between nations rather than grandiose statements, let alone establishing nebulous concepts like security architectures. And he also emphasised that this is, a partial thing, but he did say that this is building, I think, an excellent metaphor, a new nervous system for Asia. It's worth noting that it's for much of Asia. Again, the Tianjin Declaration says it focuses on the core of Central Asia rather than Southeast Asia, rather than West Asia. But it does focus on that core of Central Asia. Doesn't extend into the West Pacific, doesn't extend into the Indian Ocean as such. And it's not a transcontinental initiative like BRICS as well. It will inevitably, it's a regional security collaboration backed up by economic and cultural initiatives, and is really, I guess, a platform towards better multilateral cooperation within the framework of the United Nations all around the world. So it's nor is it a complete Eurasian security architecture, and that is a concept that has been articulated by Russian and Chinese leaders. But Vladimir Putin did say this about the nature of the move towards better arrangements for security within Eurasia laid by the SCO. There is no doubt that the SCO makes a tangible contribution to strengthening an atmosphere of cooperation and mutual trust across the entire Eurasian continent. In doing so, it helps lay the political and socio-economic foundations for a new system of stability, security, and peaceful development in Eurasia. A system that would replace outdated Eurocentric and Euro-Atlantic models, take into account the interests of the widest possible range of countries and be genuinely balanced, thus preventing attempts by some states to ensure their own security at the expense of others. But again, this is the small work of establishing trust and better processes and better connections and better institutions, rather than the grandiose building blocks of security architecture. So do check out Kabor Kamarsian's video on this point. I think it's a very wise assessment that he's made. Okay, the next point I want to make about this is there has been, of course, a lot of commentary about, India, being pushed towards China by Trump's activities, his tariff policies and his hostility, particularly in the form of Peter Navarro, towards India. And I think what I would also point out that this summit reveals to me that there has been a substantial move by China towards India. And what's more, this process has been underway for quite some time. The resolution of the border conflict, the management of the border conflict has been occurring for 5 years. And I think they're up to about the 25th round of negotiations and making substantial progress on those matters. And there have been some significant tensions in recent times, including in relationship to Operation Sindoor and the use of Chinese weapons, Chinese intelligence and all that kind of thing. But I do think China has moved towards India, offered India significant concessions here, and Russia, particularly Vladimir Putin, has played a key role as a broker in that. In many ways, there is some complementary roles developing between these three major powers. And again, my analysis is there's 5 great powers in the world: Europe, United States, Russia, India, and China. And the synergy and the deepening connections between Russia, India, and China will change fundamentally the balance of power around the world. Recently, and like in the last couple of weeks, Russia made an announcement about admitting a significant number of Indian workers into its industries, including its mining industries. China is also going to invest more in India. But also, India is, as ever, pursuing a multi-alignment strategy, and good on them. I think that is the right approach, and I think you'll see in all the states of SCO, it's moving beyond block thinking, dualistic thinking that even critics of unipolarity, even advocates of multipolarity, often fall into this kind of, it's BRICS versus the West type analysis. India's got to choose a side, whereas in fact India will stand its ground and develop its relationships with everyone. Modi preceded, immediately prior to the visit to Tianjin, Narendra Modi visited Japan and announced a special strategic and global partnership between India and Japan, with a similar plan for the next decade, with a focus on investment, innovation, economic security, environment, technology, health, mobility, people-to-people ties, and regional government cooperation. And indeed, there is a plan for very significant 10 trillion yen investment from Japan in India over the next 10 years. Japan and India are members of the Quad, but they are strengthening their bilateral cooperation independent of that as well. And of course, Japan is ever so subtly also ensuring it doesn't alienate its East Asian sisters, Korea and China, in managing its complicated relationship with the United States. The next key point I really want to make here is that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is not replacing the United Nations. It is affirming the importance of the United Nations Charter, United Nations institutions, and multilateral action. It recognises that currently those institutions, those legal frameworks, those it's especially in the United Nations Security Council, are not working adequately, but it does affirm the UN as the basis, and in a way the SCO is the lifting of the boats of the other countries of the world, so that the Western powers can no longer engage in unilateralist, universalist action within the United Nations. Indeed, it's worth noting that Vladimir Putin spoke to the SCO heads meeting and said this about the United Nations. The UN Charter enshrined fundamental principles: the primacy of international law, the right of nations to self-determination, sovereign equality, non-interference in internal affairs, and respect for the independence and national interests of every state. These principles remain valid and unshakable to this day. The Shanghai Cooperation is built on these very principles. It brings together like-minded partners committed to shaping a just multipolar world. Shaping a just multipolar world. Again, SCO is not a rival world order. It's not establishing a new world order. It's a platform for the rest of the world, particularly the sort of Central Asian, Eurasian states, to get up onto the same plateau that the United States and Europe and the sort of Western-oriented countries like Australia have sat on and sneered down on the rest of the world at for too long. It's becoming clear now that by building an effective, functioning, multilateral, multipolar organisation like the Shanghai Cooperation, like BRICS, like a range of other organisations around the world, the playing field of the world game of geopolitics is levelling out, and no one can claim sort of universal hegemony. It's also worth pointing out, I think, that there is a strong statement about UN governance reform, particularly the UN Security Council here, as well as, I guess, processes and operations of UN organisations. It's long been perceived from India's perspective and from others' perspective that China has sort of blocked India's decades-long campaign to be included in the United Nations Security Council. And I think adding India to that UN Security Council would be a major improvement. I do wonder whether, again, this is part of China's embrace of India and Russia as much as the other way around. I think this might be a sign that there is going to be growing pressure on the Western powers to finally realise that having 3 NATO countries, the USA, France and Britain, on the UN Security Council, and excluding the world's most populous country, the entirety of Africa, the entirety of South America, and many other important states around the world, that approach is no longer sustainable. I do hope it's been a long road on UN Security Council reform, and it may still be quite a long road, but I do feel the days of the 1945 arrangement are coming to an end. Now, my final overall comment comes back to one of my early comments here, and it is one that is worth taking into account, particularly when one watches the tone and the nature of the bilateral discussions, which between Xi and Putin and Xi and Modi, etc. that have dominated a lot of the media coverage of the event. What I wanted to point out was at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in June this year, so 2 to 3 months ago, Vladimir Putin, it was explicitly put to Vladimir Putin that Russia and China and the other states of SCO and of BRICS and so forth are, overturning, creating a new world order. He explicitly said, no, that wasn't the case. This is what he said.
You mentioned the following when you were debating with my colleague from the People's Republic of China. You said, and I wrote it down, the Russian Federation and China are forming a new world order. Russia and China are not forming a new world order. We are merely formalizing it. The new world order is emerging naturally. It's like the sunrise. You can't stop it. What we are doing is simply formalizing it and perhaps clearing the way for this process so that it becomes more balanced and meets the interests of the overwhelming majority of countries. We very much hope that all countries will become aware of this and will ultimately understand, as I've already said, that this approach, the approach of finding solutions, is better than the approach of pressure, and in fact, better than the essentially neo-colonial world order that humanity has lived under for many, many centuries, if not millennia.
I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's given you some insight into what's really changing in the world today. Do go over to my Substack at jeffrich.substack. Thanks for watching.